Welcome to another Charlie Crime Buster. I'm your host, James Buckland, and in this episode of Charlie Investigates, Charlie and I discuss the investigation that took place when Scott Peterson went missing. And in this specific episode, we'll be addressing the topic of the importance of eyewitnesses, including additional involvement of the Los Angeles Innocence Project. So sit back and get comfortable as we get right into this episode.
You get the background and you get the flavor of what's happening, because we want to try to let our audience see it from the eyes of investigators as they saw it that day. And one thing I would point out before we get into the eyewitnesses, something that was a little unusual, and I don't think we've talked about this to this point before, but what was unusual in this case from the very beginning is the patrol officer immediately calling a detective in.
Right.
That usually doesn't happen that quick. And trying to find out, and I've spent a lot of time with all kinds of material, especially listening to the detectives themselves. And basically, what one of the detectives said about that, he said that the patrol officer felt a little uneasy about what he was seeing there and what he was hearing from Scott, and he just felt that homicide detective ought to be brought in right away. And the other interesting thing is that the detective bureau, they have they have basically a process that they set up where they investigate particular cases, and it's called cases without a body. And they literally thought from the very beginning that this would be a case without a body. And one of the things they said that really alerted them to is that Lacey, did not have a drug problem. She was an outstanding young lady. She did not participate in high risk activity. So that's what really alarmed everybody, and I believe even her family, because when they go through things like that, they usually ask questions like, hey, did they clear out their bank account? Did they do this? Are they involved with some sort of gang, or are they involved in some sort of drugs or this sort of thing? But none of that came to be. So I think lots of folks in this investigation from the very beginning thought that Lacey would not come back.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So they actually thought that she was already gone.
That what they were saying, and I've spent a lot of time really looking closely at the detectives, and not only their actions but their words, even since from the investigation. And basically what they said is that they certainly were hoping that she would come back. They would not, of course, reveal any of this to the family, because good night, you don't just walk up to the family and say, hey, I don't think you're ever going to see her again. That based on, on their own experience, that they just felt like that something really seriously happened. It wasn't just somebody getting lost, or it wasn't just even a kidnapping, there wasn't any ransom or anything like that. They felt from the get-go that and then unfortunately, and I think all of us will agree with this, we're all very, very disappointed that they were right in that one area, that she would not be coming back.
Right. Yeah.
So involved in all that, one of the things with the Los Angeles Innocence Project is that one of the claims that they have brought to the courts is that there were eyewitnesses that said they saw Lacey walk the dog on Christmas Eve. And in some of the times that they said they saw her walking the dog, then it would not really fit into the timeline that the investigators were building at that time. So in other words, if she was walking the dog at 10:45, 11, 12, 1, 2, then Scott has an alibi, because he was away 90 miles away, fishing in the afternoon, and they pretty well knew he was at the warehouse. So that's why these eyewitnesses are so important.
Well, you mentioned that there were 4 categories of eyewitnesses. What are they, and what do they mean?
Right. Well, one was, and what one of the things they said, hey, the detectives did not interview everybody, so that that the detectives did not really do their job with the eyewitnesses. So one of the first categories is those that were never ever interviewed by the police. And as I think I said, in the podcast, if you thought somebody, if you're looking for a missing person and somebody says, hey, I saw them, you would think you would want to talk to that person, right?
Yeah, you think, yeah.
First areas were those that were never interviewed by the police. Another one was there was a group that was contacted by the police. They contacted them, they took initial statements, but they never really pursued what they said. They said, okay, we'll take it down. They took it down, but they never pursued it. And the third one was that there was some group that did say it, but their accounts were totally discounted. It was just way off. There's no way it could have been her. And the last but not least, there were some that were interviewed, however, they were interviewed late in the case. One of the examples we gave in the podcast this last week was, one person was interviewed in 2003, early 2003, by the defense's investigator, but the prosecution's investigator, detectives, never interviewed him until 2004, almost a year later. And I got to tell you, James, with interviewing witnesses, it is critical to get to them as quick as you can, because time has a way of distorting our memories.
Sure.
We forget things, but on top of that, sometimes we are also influenced. We see this one and say, well, this person did this and this person looked this way, that way, then that gets into our mind, and it builds things that aren't there. Like one of the things I think I use as an illustration, the mind's a crazy thing. You put 4 people at an intersection. I think I said interstate, but at an intersection.
Yeah.
And you have an accident, and you got 4 different people at different corners of the intersection. You're going to get 4 different stories.
That's right.
Go say, I've seen it happen. It was a brown car. No, it was a green car. He had a red shirt on. No, he had a white shirt on. I mean, people see it differently. So our minds are kind of a fragile thing. Our memories are, and so it's really important to try to nail it down as quick as you can. Now, once you nail it down at the very beginning, then you have kind of a baseline with that statement, and you can see, okay, 6 months from now, what do you say? What changed from what you said then and what you said then, and you can kind of judge with things, with that. But those are the 4 basic categories.
Well, and can you come up with a reason why an eyewitness to a missing person would not be immediately contacted or interviewed by the police?
Well, after all, it is a missing person case, right?
Yeah.
Well, I surprised you with that one, but yeah, I do have a reason. I have 10,000 of them. 10,000. Now get this, there were 10,000 tips that came in on this case. And I don't care if you're 100 or 200 police officers, it's really difficult to follow 10,000 tips. And, in fact, on December the 24th alone, that day alone, there were 74 sightings of Lacey.
74.
4. Now, obviously, she couldn't be in those 74 different places, and
right.
Places were all over the place. Some said they saw her in San Francisco Bay. Others said they were other parts of California. There was also sightings in 26 other states. And not only sightings in 26 other states, there was sightings in Canada, Italy, France, the Virgin Islands, and in early January, I'm talking about early January, and remember this happened right at the end of December almost,
Right.
In early January, by January the 20th, there were 2,300 that was turned in.
Mm-hmm.
And in February of that same year, it actually jumped to 4,500. So, obviously, if you got that many statements, it's not like, just 5 or 6 people suddenly gave you a story. You've got to sort through those. You got to say, who do we go to and who do we talk to and that sort of thing. So I think we got to give them a little slack in that when you get bombarded with that many tips and sightings, that you're not going to get to everybody right away, and there probably could be times when it could go through. There's another thing too that I think is very important. There wasn't just the police tip line. There was also a tip line set up by Laci's family, and I think it was 1-866 Laci Info. So there was not only tips and sightings going into the police department, there were also tips and sightings going into this other independent tip line. Mm-hmm. And we don't know how many of those tips got turned over to the police, that the police would know that that was it. And it would be very easily, if you're a civilian out there and you just see a tip line, to think that if you use this tip line, it's automatically going to get to the police. And doesn't necessarily mean that it will necessarily get to the police. In fact, the detectives themselves thought they would try out something. So they actually called that other tip line and left a tip that involved Scott, and it never got turned over to the police.
Interesting.
So that's very interesting when you think about it. So there were, there were definitely bombarded with that, and so I can see why that some of them would fall into these four areas. But you would think that the real, you would initially initially kind of zero in on some of the tips that have the most opportunity at being something that you might ought to follow up with.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now and allow all of this information about eyewitnesses to sink in. And in the meantime, you can listen to this very important message.
If you or someone you know is a victim of domestic violence, please call 1-800-799-7233. 1-800-799-7233.
So we're talking about interviewing, witnesses, but how would you interview an eyewitness, for in this case?
Detectives, good detectives, they ask a lot of questions, and that's why it's called an interview. And some people think, and some people probably would treat this as, well, this person said they saw Laci, or they say they thought they saw Laci walking the dog. Mm-hmm. And I just got it down. This person saw him right there this time, that sort of thing. You got to really test that sighting. So you ask questions like, where did you see her? How far away were you? That has something to do with it. I mean, if I tell you I see somebody and it's a half a block or block down the way, I'm not going to have a really good visual picture of that person. I'm just going to see certain things. So how far away were you? And where were you standing when you saw her? What time? If it was getting dark, or what was the weather like? Did you have a clear sight? How long did you see the person? I think that's important. I mean, somebody just goes by quickly. I would say that most of us would not be able to give you a total description if somebody just quickly went by. But if you were able to see them and they were standing, still, and you were standing still, that's a different thing. You're going to ask, what was she wearing? Which direction she was going. Now, today, that question is more important than it was then, because when you say which direction you are going today, goodness gracious, and I know we have cameras all over the place, right?
Right.
And person's heading in a direction, may not be a camera there, but down 2 blocks from here, there may be a camera, right?
Right.
So really important to ask that question today in investigations, because you want to try to nail down if you could pick up that person on a camera, on a Ring camera or something like that. But back those days, they didn't have that. But you still want to know which direction they were going in, because then you can start asking people who were in that area, did you see this person walking in this direction? Mm-hmm. Because one of the most important things with all evidence is to do your best to independently collaborate what you saw or what you heard. This is one of the things, and we did a whole series with Charlie Kirk's shooting, and there's a podcaster, Candace Owen, who throws out all kinds of things, but none of those things are independently collaborated, right. Which that's just somebody giving thoughts, So you really want to try to independently collaborate. You want to ask the person, was there anybody with you? Did anybody else see this? Can anybody else back what you said? All those are important questions, and that's not to disparage the person who's giving this account, because we need good eyewitnesses. And some people think they see things, and they really think they see things, but you really do have to test it, because it's easy to jump to a conclusion and not have a real sighting,
Well, if someone saw someone, how can that be wrong?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah. Well, it does happen. Happens quite often, and this is something that I think is really interesting. Should be interesting to our listeners, because I'm going to give you some statistics now from the very company that is making these claims, and that is the Innocent Project. The Innocent Project. They have given us data now that in exonerations, and as we've said earlier on, this is a good organization, and they have gotten a lot of folks exonerated through DNA. But did you know, James, that in those people that they had exonerated, those cases, 259 cases, 69% of those cases where they were exonerated by DNA had actual eyewitnesses.
Wow.
So you can get it wrong. It does happen, and it happens more. And this is another thing that we want to look at this, as you say, and I love when you give our disclaimer, because I think it's so true. We really don't want to follow somebody's theory in this. We want to follow the evidence. But in following the evidence, I think we have to point out, that one thing that one of the detectives said that the Innocent Project put into their claim, which I think was not really fair, because it was taken out of context. He said, well, these eyewitnesses aren't a priority. Well, what he meant by that is that eyewitnesses have a prone to be incorrect. So the priority is to get the real evidence that backs up all this. But he certainly shouldn't have said they're not a priority. But I know what he meant when he said that the eyewitnesses are important, but it's more important to be able to test the eyewitness to make sure that what they're saying is true or it's not.
Well, you bring up an interesting question. Other than the questions that you do ask a witness, how else would you test a witness?
Well, another thing you could look for is obstructions. Was there anything between you and that person that would obstruct the view? That's something you want to look for. Were there things there to obstruct them? You want to see a guy like me, at my age, I've got these things right here on, these glasses that are on. Do you wear glasses? Yes. Did you have your glasses on?
Right.
Have contacts. You're going to look at something like that. You're going to look at, was there anything distracting you when you were looking? Were you doing something? And today we know what that would be, right?
Right.
At your phone, right?
Yep.
Probably wouldn't be many eyewitnesses today, because they're too busy. Everybody's too busy scrolling. Was there anything distracting? Was this somebody you were expecting to see? And one really important thing is, do you know the person? Because somebody could see you, James, and maybe there was a poster put up that we're looking for you and are looking for me, and I'm a wanted person or something like this. And they could see somebody that they think is me, that looks like me, but if you saw me, you would know whether it was me or not, because
right.
We have knowledge of each other, and we know, hey, that guy may look like Donnie, that guy may look like James, but that's, they're similar, but that's not the real person. But if you know that person, you pretty well do it. So you're gonna say, do you know the person, or is this just somebody you've seen on the poster? One of the things I think is really interesting when it comes to eyewitnesses is that the poster that was sent out and the description that was sent out had her with dark pants on and a white blouse. We do know that when her body was found, she did not have that on. So, there's a good possibility that she was not wearing the black pants and the white top. And it was amazing how many of these people mentioned the black pants and the white top, which it goes again how we can have certain things planted into our mind. Now, I'm not saying that any of these people were wrong. I'm just saying that these are some things that you have to keep in mind with eyewitnesses, because eyewitnesses are a part of this, and it's something that we need to look at, and we need to let folks know, the real truth about eyewitnesses. They sometimes are not reliable, and sometimes they are reliable. But the question is, maybe one person did see it. If one person saw it and it really was a person, then this changes this case altogether.
Right. Well, keeping the eyewitness in perspective, what was a strong point for the prosecution in reference to the eyewitness?
I think, in my opinion, the strongest part of the prosecution, and again, we're trying to stay on focus with eyewitnesses here tonight.
Right.
I think it was the fact that they could really come back and say, hey, we may not have talked to everybody that said they saw her, but most everybody was investigated. We may not have done it, but the defense, it also had an investigator, and they investigated many of these own eyewitnesses. Now, keep in mind, I know for a fact that the attorney, Garrigus, he was actually paid $1 million. And then running halfway through the case, he got a hold of the family and said, I need more money. So if you have $1 million in a case, you're going to have some really good investigators out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were investigators that talked to most all of these witnesses, but they were coming back and saying, hey, many of these eyewitnesses were presented in the trial by, on charts. This person saw this person, and displays and this type of thing. So these eyewitnesses were brought before the jury. But the strongest thing is, if I was a defense attorney and I had a good bona fide eyewitness that I thought could stand up to the test, I would certainly put that person on the stand. And not one single eyewitness was called by the defense.
Wow.
And you have to ask yourself a question: why is that?
Mm-hmm.
And most of us think that that's because he knew they would not stand up to the scrutiny that they would have to stand up to, and that it would backfire on him. And if anything, it might turn the jury against him, because they would say, hey, that person didn't know what they were talking about.
Wow. So keeping in mind, again, keeping in mind the eyewitness aspect of it, what is the strong point for the LAIP?
Well, the LAIP, I think was the fact that there were certain people that were not interviewed by the police, and the police themselves, the prosecution, did in court, agree that we did not talk to all the eyewitnesses, and I think that's to an average civilian out there, you got to scratch. Well, why wouldn't you? Right?
Right.
I mean, what do you got to hide? And I think now, probably, in light of the claims, I'm sure that the investigators said, hey, we should have run down every one of them and brought them in. I'm sure they had come to the conclusion, that Lacey died before 10:18 that morning. And so, they didn't put a lot of credibility into the eyewitnesses. But if you had nailed this down and took, tested every one of these things, then every one of these eyewitnesses, you could say, hey, this is the reason why this person was wrong, or this person wasn't wrong. You say it. So I think the strongest point was the fact that the prosecution did admit that there were some people that they didn't talk to. And then I think it was really unfortunate and a missed opportunity that was missed by the prosecutor, and he misspoke when he said they weren't a priority. He should have said are very much a priority, but you also have to test witnesses. But they got him up on that. And the other thing I think is strong, I think it's really strong, James, right now. It's stronger today than it was during the trial, is the fact that A&E came out with this special that was on, and there are a lot of people that do not have all the information of the Scott Peterson case, and all they're listening to is what this special has brought to the forefront. And I think that there is a different mood now about this case that wasn't present during that time. I think, Garris, I think the attorney, I thought one of the illustrations I thought was absolutely really brilliant that he gave. He said, I also represented the Mendez brothers. No, that's the other guy that. But he said I've represented some really bad people. And he said, when I was representing Scott, I'd go out and work out in the gym in the mornings, and people would come up and say, "How could you represent him?" And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, he could. Well, how do you know it? And he'd say something. He'd say, "I debunked that." And they said, "Well, I don't care. I just think he's guilty." And so he said he was getting all kinds of hate mail and all kinds of all kinds of threats. And he said just not long after that, he represented Michael Jackson.
Yep.
And everybody was in love with him,
Mm-hmm,
They
mm-hmm.
said, "Boy, man, we're glad you're in there, fighting for him, blah, blah, blah." So it is amazing how, the media and how the population can influence a case. I think that was really true when we covered, Karen Reed.
Right.
I mean, when have you ever heard of a murderer walking into the courtroom and having people cheering for her and standing for her as this crowd was in support of her?
Yeah.
And I can't say that really turned the jury to her way. I'm sure they weighed the evidence, but I think we would be amazed at what the mood of the populace is and the media take on it, how it does somehow make it way into the courtroom, even though we have all these guards up. I think it still gets there some way, don't you?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think that's another strength.
I agree. Well, when it comes to eyewitnesses, what's the bottom line for an investigator?
I think for us right now with the eyewitnesses, it's just like last week. We're going to have to take this and put this back in the evidence drawer. Again, it's not us that's going to make the choice, and that's going to be the judge. And in this particular claim, the appellate court has ruled against the LAIP, but they have now, they're going to take it to a higher court, So their claim to the lower court was denied, and so they said, "Well, we're going to take it to a higher court." So we have to say at this point that it is still in play because they're going to take it to a higher court. So it has to stay in the evidence drawer until we see what the higher court says.
Well, I know this is a lot of information to take in, and thank you for staying with us. But if you would please hang on, we've got a little bit more there at the end, but we'd like to take some time for one of our sponsors. We'll be right back.
Florida has warm weather throughout the year, and having an air conditioning system is important. Whether it's summer or winter, you'll always need your air handling system. Breezy Air Incorporated provides both commercial and residential air conditioning solutions. Solutions that are built for your comfort needs. Call Jack at 407-283-2327. You see, Breezy Air provides solutions that bring cool comfort and reliable service to their customers. Preventive care can also lengthen the life of your AC unit, and believe it or not, Breezy Air provides annual service packages. So call them today, 407-283-2327. That's 407-283-2327.
Wow. So we're looking at episode 6.
Yep.
Coming up on Sunday.
This is really going to get this. I mean, we're really getting into the heart of this case now, and the heart of what the Los Angeles Innocence Project has said. We're getting into the heart of it because now we're going to talk about this week. We're going to talk about that burglary that took place.
Okay.
Right the street from the Peterson's residence. And there are people who have ran with the burglary and saying that Lacey may have interrupted the burglary, and then she was taken and put in a van and taken away and all that. So we're gonna follow the evidence. Again, that's what we don't go by hearsay. We don't go by what people say, but we go by the evidence. So we're going to look at the evidence around the burglary that occurred during that week, and that really became a part of this case in one way or the other. All
right. Well, it sounds like an exciting weekend.
Yep, going to have another good one down the way. And I would just like I hope I remember in coming up this week, we really need to remind the folks that listen to the podcast that's dropped on the first of the week. We need to remind them about this right here, because as you see, we actually added material about this case, the eyewitnesses in here, that you did not hear on the podcast.
That's exactly right.
Real opportunity to take what we report and then to get back and talk about it and kind of dig down a little deeper in these areas. So I think this is an excellent opportunity for people who really are serious about following the evidence in this case. I think this is a good place for them to get, and amazing to me. I'm totally convinced now that if people have been following our podcast and following our talks, that some of them are better prepared to talk about it and know more than a lot of stuff that you're hearing right now online.
Right.
Because I've heard so many people that are just saying incorrect stuff out there, even some very notable people. I heard, Nancy Grace and some other guy who was interviewing her, and they just, and I know it's been a long time and maybe they weren't on the case, but there were some things that were really mixed up, and there's some things out there that have just become speculation rather than the real truth of it on both sides, on the prosecution and the defense. And so we hope to just to show that we're different in the fact that we're going after the evidence and after the truth, and not after some theory,
Awesome. Love it. All right. Well, thank you, Charlie.
All right. Thank you. And folks, let's remind the folks too that I think when we have these kind of cases like this, we have to say, regardless of what you think about who did what in this case, it does bring to our thoughts people who have been involved in domestic violence. And we want to urge folks that somebody that has, please go to the domestic violence tip line. And today it's so much easier to be, all you got to do is Google it. It's right there. And you can, they even give you a number you can text, and there are people that are there to help you. And, just yesterday, I saw and heard of another case not far from us where somebody lost their life again in domestic violence. And it's just really, really terrible. And some people think, well, it's going to get better, but most of the time, James, you and I know it doesn't get better.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So thank you for tonight. I enjoyed chatting.
Thank you, Charlie. We'd like to thank our sponsor, the PeacemakerNetwork.com. That's PeacemakerNetwork.com. Also, all of our music and sound effects are provided by our friends and contributors to Pixabay.com. They're responsible for making our podcast more enjoyable. That's Pixabay.com. And if you're a true crime junkie, we'd like to encourage you to binge-cast by listening to our podcast located on many popular podcast platforms. Simply search for Charlie Crimebuster, or say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crimebuster. Regardless of your podcast platform preference, and you have enjoyed our show, please subscribe or click the like button. And finally, here at Charlie Crimebuster, we welcome comments, suggestions, opinions, and whether you agree or disagree with our view on a topic, we still want to hear from you. So reach out with a shout-out. Email Charlie at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us again for another exciting crime episode with Charlie Crimebuster.